They are the invisible lifeline that keeps the world's air forces flying across oceans. From early barnstorming stunts and jets refueling their buddies mid-air to massive strategic tankers, here is every refueling aircraft ever built for the skies. Starting off with United States. Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey. A tilt rotor that takes off like a helicopter and flies like a turboprop already defies easy categorization. Adding aerial refueling capability to that package means this aircraft can extend the range of carrier strike groups without ever touching a runway. Then, Boeing FA-18 Super Hornet. When a carrier air wing needs fuel and no dedicated tanker is available, this aircraft fills the gap. Carrying a buddy store pod, it passes fuel to its wingmen over open ocean, keeping the strike package airborne long after fuel would otherwise force a return to the ship. Now this is the Boeing KB-29 Superfortress. The bombers that ended World War II became the machines that taught the Air Force how to refuel in flight. Modified with a probe and drogue refueling system, this aircraft moved aerial refueling from an experimental curiosity into something a military force could actually depend on. Boeing KB-50 Superfortress. Jet fighters were outrunning everything the piston era had built, so this tanker added jet pods to keep pace. 3 aircraft could receive fuel simultaneously, a capability that made it one of the most productive refueling platforms the Air Force operated in the 1950s. Now this is the Boeing KC-46 Pegasus. Built to eventually replace the aging tanker fleet the Air Force has relied on for decades, this 4-engine aircraft uses cameras and remote systems in place of a traditional boom operator window. It refuels everything from stealth fighters to the largest cargo aircraft in the inventory. Boeing KC-97 Stratofreighter. During the early Cold War, Strategic Air Command needed tankers that could keep its bombers airborne and ready. This double-deck aircraft answered that need, though its piston engines sometimes struggled to stay fast enough for the jet fighters pulling up behind it. Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker. No aircraft has done more to shape the reach of American air power than this one. Flying since the 1950s, it has refueled missions over Vietnam, the Gulf, Afghanistan, and every theater in between. It remains the backbone of global air refueling operations today. Up next, Boeing KC-137. Taking the frame of a proven commercial airliner and adapting it for the military refueling mission, this aircraft gave international air forces a capable and familiar platform for long-range operations without the cost of a purpose-built tanker. Boeing KC-767, compatible with both the flying boom and the probe and drogue systems. This wide-body tanker serves nations whose air forces operate a mix of American and European aircraft. That dual capability makes it one of the most flexible refueling platforms currently in service. Boeing MQ-25 Stingray. For the first time in the history of carrier aviation, a tanker operates without a pilot on board. Launched and recovered from a carrier deck, this unmanned aircraft extends the range of the air wing while freeing crewed jets from the refueling mission entirely. Convair R3Y Tradewind, a turboprop flying boat large enough to refuel other aircraft on the water or in the air, was an extraordinary idea, and this aircraft made it real. It remains one of the few seaplanes ever designed with aerial refueling as part of its core mission. The next one, de Havilland DH-4. In 1923, 2 pilots passed a rubber hose between their aircraft and transferred fuel in flight for the first time. The biplanes they flew were this type, and that reckless experiment over San Diego marked the absolute beginning of aerial refueling as a concept. Douglas A-1 Skyraider. Designed as an attack aircraft, this piston-engine workhorse proved so capable of carrying heavy loads that it remained in operational service far longer than anyone planned, because it was simply too useful to retire. Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. Small enough that carrier crews nicknamed it the Scooter, this compact jet punched well above its weight as a buddy tanker. Orbiting above the carrier with a refueling pod on its centerline, it kept strike aircraft topped off and gave pilots a margin they badly needed over the target. Up next, Douglas C-1. Before aerial refueling was a military doctrine, it was an experiment that most aviation authorities doubted would ever be practical. This early transport took part in some of the first successful fuel transfers ever recorded, helping prove the skeptics wrong. Now this is the Douglas Ka-3 Sky Warrior. the heaviest aircraft ever to routinely operate from a carrier deck. This machine was originally built as a nuclear strike platform before being converted into a tanker. With the largest fuel load any carrier aircraft could carry, it became the fleet's primary source of airborne fuel for years. Grumman Ka-6 Intruder. Converted from a dedicated all-weather attack aircraft, this tanker variant orbited near the carrier and served as an airborne fuel reserve for jets returning low on gas. For 2 decades, it was the aircraft that kept carrier air wings flying when margins were tight. Lockheed HC-130 Hercules. Search and rescue missions can take helicopters far beyond the range their fuel allows. This aircraft solves that problem by refueling them in flight, extending their reach to survivors hundreds of miles offshore in conditions where nothing else could help. Lockheed KC-130 Hercules. The Marine Corps needed a tanker that could operate from short dirt strips close to the front, not from polished runways far behind the lines. This aircraft answered that requirement and has served the Marines in every major conflict for more than 50 years. Lockheed MC-130 Hercules. Special operations missions often require aircraft to refuel other special operations aircraft in complete darkness, at low altitude, and deep inside hostile airspace. This variant was built specifically for that mission, combining advanced electronics with the ability to pass fuel under conditions no conventional tanker would attempt. Lockheed S-3 Viking. Originally designed to hunt Soviet submarines from carrier decks, this aircraft found a valuable second career as an organic carrier tanker after the Cold War. Its long endurance and deck compatibility made it a natural fit for keeping the air wing fueled during operations far from shore. Up next, McDonnell Douglas KC-10 Extender. Capable of carrying both cargo and fuel on the same mission, this 3-engine widebody gave the Air Force a tanker that could simultaneously move equipment and refuel the aircraft escorting it. Both boom and drogue systems allow it to serve virtually any aircraft in any Air Force. McDonnell Douglas KDC-10. Adapted from a commercial widebody for military refueling duties, this export variant brought high-capacity tanking to Allied air forces that needed global reach without the budget for a purpose-built military aircraft. Then, North American A.J. Savage. An unusual mix of piston and jet propulsion made this one of the stranger aircraft to operate from carrier decks in the early 1950s. Its conversion into a tanker established that heavy carrier-based aircraft could take on the refueling mission, opening a path for the dedicated carrier tankers that followed. Up next, Vought A-7 Corsair II. A carrier attack aircraft by primary design, this jet regularly flew with a buddy store pod that allowed it to pass fuel to other aircraft still far from the ship. The combination of strike capability and refueling flexibility made it one of the most useful aircraft operating from carrier decks during its service life. Let's move on to United Kingdom. Avro Lancaster. The bomber that defined British strategic air power in World War II became an unlikely test platform for post-war aerial refueling experiments. Trials conducted with modified examples helped validate techniques that would eventually become standard practice across the Royal Air Force. Avro Lincoln. Developed from the Lancaster for post-war service, this bomber took on refueling duties using the looped hose system developed by Flight Refueling Limited. The technique was awkward and demanded precision from both crews, but it kept aircraft airborne far longer than their tanks alone allowed. Avro Vulcan. When Britain needed to strike targets in the South Atlantic in 1982, this delta-wing bomber was the only aircraft with the range, and even then it required multiple aerial refuelings each way. Converted Handley Page Victor aircraft provided the fuel that made the Black Buck raids physically possible. Blackburn Buccaneer. Built for low-level strike missions at sea, this aircraft also carried a buddy refueling store that allowed it to top off fellow naval aircraft during intensive operations. Its ruggedness and reliability in the maritime environment made it a trusted partner for carrier air wings far from any diversion airfield. De Havilland Sea Vixen. This twin-boom carrier fighter had a distinctive look, unlike anything else on the flight deck, and its refueling pod added a practical dimension to its already capable airframe. Flying as a mobile fuel source allowed the fleet to sustain operations at distances the aircraft's own fuel load would never have supported. Handley Page Harrow. Before the Royal Air Force had a doctrine for aerial refueling, this heavy bomber and transport was helping write one. Used in the late 1930s to experiment with fuel transfer during long-distance mail flights, it was among the first British aircraft to demonstrate that the technique had real practical value. Handley Page Victor. One of the 3-5 bombers designed to carry Britain's nuclear deterrent, this aircraft outlasted that role and went on to serve for decades as a tanker. Its crescent-shaped wing made it instantly recognizable, and it was still providing fuel to aircraft during the Gulf War of 1991. Lockheed TriStar. Purchased second-hand from commercial airlines and converted for military use, this wide-body jet gave the Royal Air Force a large-capacity tanker and long-range transport in a single airframe. Its size and stability made the experience of receiving fuel behind it considerably easier than behind smaller tankers. Supermarine Scimitar. Carrier aviation's persistent problem has always been range. This powerful naval strike fighter helped address it by doubling as a buddy tanker, giving the fleet flexibility that a dedicated tanker would have required a separate aircraft to provide. Vickers Valiant. The first of Britain's 5 bombers to convert to the tanker role, this aircraft helped establish the Royal Air Force's approach to strategic aerial refueling. Metal fatigue ended its career earlier than planned, but the doctrine it helped develop carried forward into every tanker that came after it. Next, Vickers VC-10. 4 rear-mounted engines gave this aircraft an exceptionally clean wing and exceptional fuel efficiency. Converted from airliner service, it became the primary tanker for the Royal Air Force through the 1980s and 90s, flying fuel to aircraft across every theatre Britain operated in. Next on the list is Soviet Union, Russia. Ilyushin 78. With 3 refueling points capable of serving multiple aircraft simultaneously, this aircraft forms the foundation of Russian strategic aerial refueling. Built to operate from rough and unprepared airfields, it was designed for the reality that Soviet bases might not survive the opening hours of a major conflict. The next one, Ilyushin 96, known primarily as a long-haul passenger aircraft, this widebody was adapted to carry strategic fuel loads for long-range missions. Its enormous internal volume translated directly into tanking capacity that smaller converted aircraft simply could not match. Up next, Mikoyan MiG-29K, a carrier-based fighter carrying a buddy refueling pod, is a compact solution to the problem of range over open ocean. This aircraft takes that role seriously, extending the reach of Russian naval aviation without requiring a separate dedicated tanker to share the flight deck. Myasishchev 3M. Originally conceived as a strategic bomber to reach targets in the American interior, this aircraft was later converted to support the bombers it once flew alongside. Extending the range of Soviet long-range strike aircraft was a mission that shaped the entire Cold War balance of power. Myasishchev M4, a 2-engine jet that NATO called the Badger, this aircraft began life as the Soviet answer to American strategic bombers and ended it as a tanker, keeping those same bombers in the air. Its conversion reflected the Soviet recognition that range without refueling was a fatal limitation. Then, Sukhoi Su-24. A variable sweep wing gives this tactical bomber the flexibility to operate across a wide range of speeds, and a buddy refueling store extends that flexibility to the aircraft flying with it. Deep strike missions against defended targets benefit enormously from having a fuel source that can keep pace with the strike package. Tupolev Tu-4. Reverse-engineered from American B-29s that landed in Soviet territory during World War II, this piston bomber became the platform for the Soviet Union's first aerial refueling experiments. The techniques developed with it laid the groundwork for everything the Soviet tanker fleet would eventually become. Tupolev Tu-16. Soviet engineers developed a wingtip-to-wingtip refueling technique for specific variants of this aircraft, where the tanker and receiver flew in close formation while fuel transferred through a hose passed between their wingtips. It demanded extraordinary precision from both crews, and remains one of the most demanding refueling methods ever used operationally. Now let's look at France. Dassault Étendard 4, French carrier aviation, demanded aircraft that could extend their reach without always relying on shore-based support. And this strike jet answered by carrying a refueling pod that allowed it to serve as a fuel source for other naval aircraft operating from the same deck. The next one, Dassault Rafale. A fully multi-role combat aircraft that adds aerial refueling to an already extensive list of capabilities. With a buddy store pod, it supports the carrier air wing without requiring a dedicated tanker aircraft. which on a ship where deck space is always limited is an enormous practical advantage.
Dassault Super Étendard. This naval strike aircraft served French carrier aviation for decades and regularly carried a refueling pod to extend the range of strike packages heading toward distant targets. Its combination of combat capability and tanking flexibility made it one of the most useful aircraft ever to operate from a French carrier. Moving on to Multinational Europe. Airbus A310 MRTT.
Converting a proven wide-body airliner into a military tanker transport demonstrated that commercial efficiency and military utility were not mutually exclusive. Several air forces adopted this aircraft as proof that a converted passenger jet could meet demanding operational requirements.
Airbus A330 MRTT.
Widely regarded as the most capable tanker transport currently in production, this aircraft carries more fuel than almost any competitor, while simultaneously moving cargo and personnel. Operators across 4 continents have chosen it as the centerpiece of their aerial refueling capability.
Airbus A400M Atlas.
Turboprop power gives this tactical airlifter the ability to slow down far enough to refuel helicopters, a mission that pure jet tankers cannot safely perform. It can then accelerate to support fast jets, making it the only production tanker capable of serving both roles on the same sortie.
Next, Airbus C295.
A removable refueling kit transforms this compact turboprop transport into a tanker capable of supporting smaller air forces operating in remote areas with limited infrastructure. It proves that effective aerial refueling does not always require a large, dedicated aircraft.
Panavia Tornado.
Designed as a low-level strike aircraft for European airspace, this variable sweep wingjet can carry a buddy store pod that allows it to pass fuel to other aircraft during missions where a dedicated tanker might not be available. Combat flexibility has always been one of its defining characteristics.
Transall C-160.
A veteran tactical transport that served French and German air forces for decades, the refueling variant of this twin turboprop provided European forces with a capable tanker that could operate from short airfields close to where the fuel was actually needed.
Let's move on to China. Xi'an H-6.
Descended from a Soviet bomber design of the 1950s, this aircraft has served the People's Liberation Army Air Force in multiple roles for decades. As a tanker, it extends the range of Chinese fighters and strike aircraft beyond what ground-based fuel alone would allow, a capability that matters enormously across the vast distances of the Pacific.
Xi'an Y-20, China's largest military aircraft adapted for aerial refueling,
represents a significant expansion of the country's ability to project air power over long distances. A tanker of this size changes the strategic calculus for any force that has to plan around it.
Let's move on to Brazil. Embraer KC-390 Millennium.
Brazil designed this jet tactical airlifter from the outset with aerial refueling capability as part of its mission set. Faster and more modern than the turboprop transports it competes with, it brings a new level of performance to the tactical tanker role.
Next up, Israel. IAI 707 REM.
Israel converted retired commercial airliners into capable military tankers, adapting them to keep the Israeli Air Force's fighter fleet airborne during extended operations. The conversion demonstrated that creative engineering could extract serious military utility from civilian hardware.
The next one, IAI 767 MMTT.
A wide-body converted for multiple simultaneous missions, this aircraft can move fuel, cargo, and personnel on the same sortie. The flexibility to reconfigure between roles without returning to base reflects Israel's operational requirement to get maximum use from every aircraft in its small but capable fleet.
Ending with Canada. Airbus CC-150 Polaris.
Canada operates this converted narrow-body to support its own forces and allied operations across the Atlantic and beyond. Its long range and large fuel capacity make it the primary means by which Canadian aircraft participate in coalition missions far from home.